one action at a time, and your host for the Creative Activist Summit. I am so delighted you've joined us on this journey to listen to 24 amazing speakers for 8 days, because I truly believe creative expression and the work that we're doing in the world has the power to transform consciousness both personally and collectively. Creative expression has the power to uplift humanity, nurture the heart and soul. It has the power to bring hope and vision to the world. It reveals truths that we often don't want to see and gives us a way to open up our hearts and minds and create, systemic change. And one of those people who I've been longing to interview for quite a while is Cynthia Kersey. I heard her speak 2 years ago at an event called Dream Builder Live that's put on by Mary Morrissey, and her story so inspired me, and I know it's going to inspire you. So let me tell you a little bit about Cynthia. She is the best-selling author of 2 books, Unstoppable and Unstoppable Women. She's a speaker, an entrepreneur, national columnist, team coach, and chief humanitarian officer of her nonprofit foundation, whose focus is to ensure that every child on the planet has access to the lifelong gift of education. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Ray. So excited to be here with you.
Thank you. I am too. So this is a great opportunity for us to have a conversation, and it's very much for everyone who's listening. That's the way I like to do it. As we're really having a conversation. So if questions come up, I'm going to ask Cynthia about it, and we're going to go with the flow, as I say. So Cynthia, who or what inspires you?
Well, who or what?
Or both.
That's a very big question. My word that I really govern my life around is inspiration. So I make all of my decisions based on the level of inspiration that I feel about an opportunity, a project, etc. So my number one inspiration is to what I'm committed to in the world with my foundation, to ensure that every child gets access to a quality education. And the way that we do that is through empowering the entire community. So we can talk a little bit more about that. So that inspires me personally, and who inspires me are people who are generous, who use their life and their voice for something that's meaningful and bigger than themselves. I have so many people that inspire me, and including the women and the children that we serve and the communities that we serve that endure and experience things we would never have to experience. For example, getting up early in the morning, the women and girls are fetching water, walking an hour or two every single day one way to carry 40 pounds of water on their back so that the families have water to cook with, to clean with, to feed the animals, to bathe. It's like, what they experience and how they do it with such grace, and how committed they are to transforming their lives and ensuring their children get an education, that inspires me greatly.
Can you tell people how you got involved in that in the first place?
Yeah. So I wouldn't even mind kind of taking it back even to the very beginning. So I wrote my first book, Unstoppable, back in 1998. And I quit my job, cashed in my entire life savings. I had a very successful career in corporate America. I was a national account manager for Sprint Communications, and I had sold the Kinko's account, which was a $30 million account. And so I'm making great money. I'm at the top of my field, and I'm not inspired by what I was doing. And I'd always loved stories about unstoppable people. So, I'd never written anything more than a college term paper in my entire life. I didn't have any real reason to think I could write a book, much less get it published. But I was inspired by the idea of encouraging other people to live unstoppable lives, right? They had inspired me. I'd read their stories for so many years. And so I made that decision. So in 1996, I quit that job, cashed in my life savings, my then husband's life savings, to be able to really pursue this purpose. So the book comes out in 1998, and 18 months after that, my husband of 20 years and I separate and get a divorce. So here I am, a single mother living on a $14.95 book, and my whole world had turned upside down. And I called Millard Fuller, who I had met in interviewing him for my book. He was the founder of Habitat for Humanity, and he became a very dear friend and mentor. And I called him and told him what had happened, and he said, when you have a great pain in your life, you need a greater purpose. And he had just gotten back from Nepal, and he said, why don't you build a house for a family in need? And as I thought about what he said to me, I thought, how many houses would I need to build to offset this pain in my life? And literally, it wasn't until I got to the number 100 houses that actually felt bigger than my pain. And what's crazy about that is, that would have been, I would have had to raise the money, $200,000 to build 100 homes. It was $2,000 a house in Nepal. And, I had never raised money for a project before. I didn't have a big community. I'm a brand new author. I didn't know a lot of influential people at the time. So it actually was kind of a crazy idea. But that purpose was bigger than the pain I was experiencing. So I literally called Bob Proctor, who I had just met when my first book came out, and I told him what had happened, and I said, how do I raise this money? And he's like, well, it's simple. He always talks about breaking things down to the ridiculous. Right. And he said, all you need to do is find 10 people to donate $20,000, and you're done. Easy. And I'm thinking, I don't know anybody who has $20,000. And I looked at him, and literally with every bit of courage that I could muster, I said, would you be willing to donate the first $20,000? And he told me, in retrospect, years later, he'd never donated at that level even himself. And he thought, well, what am I going to do? I just told her to find, 10 people. What am I going to do? So, of course, he ended up saying yes. And what's amazing about that is that moment transformed his life as well. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. But so that year when I was speaking and really grieving and healing, I would share this Nepal project with, everybody I came in contact with. And I think a key thing for me is I always shared it with no attachment to people saying yes, which I think is a very important thing when you're trying to enroll people into something, giving people the space to say yes or no. Because I felt like, everybody's not going to be inspired by Nepal. Everybody's not going to be inspired even now by the work that I do in Africa, but you're giving them an opportunity. And that year, I raised $200,000, and I took 18 people to Nepal that next holiday season, and we worked on building those first 3 out of the 100 homes that were subsequently built that year. And that experience, Ray, transformed my life on many levels. And the
Can you talk about that? I think people need to understand about the power of service. I know it's transformed my own life.
I'm just getting ready to go into that. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the main way that it transformed my life was, I thought I was doing something great for these families in Nepal, and it was a great thing for them. But what I hadn't anticipated was how my life would change. It's like the deep joy that I experienced putting that project together, taking the group of people over there, meeting the families who would be living in the homes that we were a part of, connecting with them one-on-one. I mean, it gave me a level of giving and experience around that I'd never experienced before. And, and what I've learned now since then is, giving is a transformational experience, or the highest level of giving, right? The most powerful level of giving is when it's a transformational experience for the giver as well as the receiver. So I was changed by what my project and the people who supported it made possible when I met them, in person, and was so deeply honored to be a part of their life and making their life better. And it gave me a purpose, right? Through my most challenging year of my life, that project gave me a purpose that was bigger than my pain. It kept my mind off of my little self and my problems and helped me see, gosh, even though I'm going through a divorce, even though I'm grieving, I have something to live for, right? I can still make a difference. And that has been a guiding principle in my life now for, it was 1996, 98, almost 20 years.
Okay, I have something similar, but on a smaller scale, which I also think people need to know. You don't have to go to Nepal. You don't have to give $20,000. I went through a divorce as well, and that first holiday where I was without my kids, I sobbed through 2 movies. I couldn't tell you the names of the movies. I sobbed the whole time. And then I went to a meeting, and somebody said, why don't you do something for somebody else? So next holiday, I'm an artist, and so I went to, the art store, and I put together goodie bags with all these art materials, and I took them to the hospital, to the children's hospital, where I knew kids were going to be there over the hospital. So the kids had something brand new that was just for them. The nurses were thrilled. The parents were thrilled, but it was me. I really was so touched by just doing that, and I've been doing that for 20 years, so
that is a great example. I love it, and you're right. It doesn't matter how big a project is. It's really around what inspires you. You asked me that, initial question, and clearly you found something that inspired you, made you feel great. So I think that's how God guides us, is through our own inspiration. So it's like when you're looking at, okay, I want to give, maybe you're going through a challenging time, really just start noticing what inspires you.
Right.
And I actually, when I'm really in a level of inspiration, I feel like I'm in heaven, It's like there's nothing missing.
Right. And there's this fullness to life, and life is just, you feel so vital and alive and just in a state of gratitude. And I think if you can go into those moments of what makes you grateful, there may be something, maybe you love to take pictures of nature. So you can do that for somebody else and just post it on Facebook. That might make them feel better, and it'll certainly make you feel better. So there's little things that you can do that I think will transform you as well as somebody else. And if you start thinking about how can I serve someone else, it does take you out of yourself.
Absolutely. And it's, to me, living a loving, conscious, successful life must include giving. If you want to be abundant, you could be a billionaire, and yet if you are holding on to money so tightly and so afraid of losing it, are you really living a prosperous life? No. The only way we can really experience true abundance and prosperity is through the act of giving. And the people, I was just going to say, the people who I know who live it are really some of the richest people on the planet, and not always in material possessions. But you and I have many people in common. Bob Proctor certainly lives that way, and he actually attributes the level of contribution that he and Sandy and his company give to Unstoppable, he says has transformed his life. The more he gives and lives into that law of giving and receiving, the more abundance he experiences in every area of his life. And you know, I've got a big long list, Mary Morrissey. There's so many people who, when you're around people who get it, it's like you can't outgive them. They get it, and they come from that place, and it's fun having friends that.
Yeah. Well, that's why
really
you're in the Transformational Council. I get that. You're part of that world. Yes.
Right. Exactly.
What I'd like to talk about a little bit more is how do you move people to action? You know, how do we move them out of apathy? How do we get them to start thinking about, you know, giving is good for the soul?
Mhm. Well, you know, there's a lot of different things, but I think the key is when people do understand at a fundamental level the law of giving and receiving. So let's just start with that. The scriptures say, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Right? So these are universal principles. It doesn't say, you know, wait until you've got money or have time or have resources or kids are in school, out of school, your business is successful. There isn't, the only condition is give first and it shall be given unto you. And the world lives from a place of scarcity, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, I can't give. If I give, that means there's less for me. And it's actually the opposite. You know, Mary Morrissey talks about give at the level, the vibrational frequency that you want to live into. I do the Ask every year for Agape in Los Angeles, which is a really large church. And 2 years ago, I talked about the law of giving and receiving, and there was an actress in the congregation. And she heard that, you know, give to the level that you actually want to earn or the frequency you want to be living in, right? The vibrational, energetic frequency. And so she made a commitment that she was going to give 10% on $100,000. That was her goal, right? So she gave 10% of that is $10,000 over the next year, even though she was really kind of a struggling artist at that point. And she said when she made that commitment and started living into that, it was like she could do no wrong. So she started going out on all of these auditions, and even though she didn't seem really right for the part, she got it. And she ended up doing over $100,000. She'd never done that. And so as I say this, I think it's important to understand you're not giving to get, right? It's a consciousness. So it's not like, okay, I need to make $100,000. If I give, $1,000 a month, I'm going to get it. It's more like this is the person I want to grow into.
Right.
The law of giving and receiving just is, right? It is,
and it's something you have to learn and relearn many times till you get it. I know for myself, it was like, I'm doing this and I want to get 500 people buy my book. No, I want to serve in a way that 500 people are empowered by buying my book or buying my gold package for the summit, because I know when they read that they're going to find such transformation doing the work, because there's ideas. Mm-hmm. How do you build, what is your calling? What is the legacy you want to leave? How do you want to touch people? All that, and when they are transformed, and it was a shift. I know as I've worked with my coaches over the years, it was a shift of what do I want to give? How do I want to serve?
Yes.
Rather
than
how...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yes.
No, I'm done.
Rather than how you're going to receive. I agree. Ray, the only distinction that I would put in there, and I completely agree with you. So when you're selling something, looking at, yes, how much service, how much contribution can I give through this product? But that's different than what I'm talking about. So, because really, in a way, when you do that, you're trading, right? It's like I'm giving you this great value, and you're paying me for a service.
Okay.
when I'm talking about giving, I'm really talking about doing something where it's not about me or my product. Because understand, this is, I think, such an important distinction. I was living my purpose, right? I quit my job, cashed my entire life savings to write Unstoppable. I was living my purpose to inspire people to live unstoppable lives. But that purpose was not bigger than my pain. So really what I'm talking about, and they're both great, it's not an either or, but
it's
the
both
giving
and.
I'm talking about right this second is more like giving where it's not like when I donate to someone or to a foundation or to a project, they're not giving me money back, right? It's like
true. I know. I understand
yes.
that. I tithe as well, so I
yes.
understand that principle.
So you know what I'm talking about.
I do understand. I think, though, I was talking about the shift in when we are in this place of service and what we want to do, and always trying to think about how are we serving someone else. So we're talking about two different things, but still the same thing, I think.
Exactly. The
Right.
energetic is the same, right, but I'm encouraging people because I think people get that a little bit more than the other, but a lot of people still don't. So I know what you're saying. It's a major shift to really look at when you're selling a product or really how can I be of service with this product. I think that is so critical. And completely agree with you. But I think the distinction of the giving. So I think they're both really, really important. And I think the piece that's made the biggest impact in my life is really the joy of looking for how can I give, how can I be of service, how can I use my money, my time to something that inspires me, that's bigger than me, and there's no obvious benefit, like I'm going to get all this stuff back. But the truth is when we give, in Malachi it says, as you give, see if I will not open up the floodgates of heaven and what is it? Open up the heaven and bless you beyond you could even comprehend. And that's really what happens when we give.
I've always said be a role model, a mentor, a volunteer. And I've been a volunteer for 40-plus years in the community where I live. And there have been, when I've done that, and you can do it in big ways, you can do it small ways. You can be on a board, you can just participate in one activity a year, but you will start finding that the more you do that, the more you'll get back from that. So
absolutely.
Right. So what I would like to talk about a little bit is your creative process, because you have written 2 books. And if you could talk about that process and just even interviewing people, what it took for you to contact people. And I know I've interviewed a lot of people in my first, my book, The Creative Activist. I interviewed over 100-plus people and then had to hone it into 36 people.
Yeah.
It would have been a 900-page book.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So when I wrote my first book, I had no idea what I was doing. So, and I put everything on the line. So, I literally quit my job and, kind of locked myself in a room. And my process for writing that first book, because I dedicated my whole time to that, right? So I literally I had to learn everything. So one of the things that I did is first off, I learned the business of writing and selling books. I think that's really important. If you just want to write a book that you're the only person that's going to read, that's one thing. But if you actually want to get your message out there, it's important to educate yourself. So on the business side, I joined, Publishers Marketing Association. I went to the Book Expo. I took programs. I remember years and years ago, Mark Victor Hansen had a program called Mega Book, and I went to that. I mean, I just really, read books. I just immersed myself in the understanding of how to get a book published, and then how do you sell it? How do you market it? So there's that business piece. And then the other piece of the creative piece that you talked about is I really kind of went with the flow, meaning I would sleep until I would no longer be sleepy. Maybe it's 2 or 3 in the morning. I would get up, and I would write. So I interviewed people, and that's a whole other process I can talk about in a second. But I would get the interviews, and then I would write and rewrite, and I personally worked with several different people, only because I really didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. But I ended up working with a few different editors on my first book. The second book, I got a big publishing deal through Rodell, so I had one editor that I worked with on that. But I just kind of went into the flow, and I kind of worked around a 24-hour cycle. I would, sleep for a couple of hours and write, and, everybody can't do that, but that's kind of what I did to get the book done. So the book was finished, the interviewing and everything was done within a year, and it was out in the market 2 years and 3 months after I quit my job. So that's actually pretty quick to get a book to market when you use a publisher. Today, you can self-publish, you can literally write a book and it's up on a Kindle, right? Almost immediately. So there's a lot more distribution channels today than there were back then. This is like 18 years ago.
And you have the idea that you can just publish on demand. So you don't have to have books sitting in your basement. Right. So there are a lot of options today. I agree. I know it was interesting going through the process because, I've done 2 books, and doing full color was very different than I found out of not doing that, because I participate in other books that are not full color, and I was like, oh, it was a lot easier because and things like that. And my first one was a workbook called Art from My Heart, a discovery journal. And so I wanted it spiral bound. Well, finding somebody who had the machine to spiral bind it, at that time, it was like,
oh, yes.
So
you learn all sorts of great things.
You do. And I think, though, the key that I want people to understand is we all have a story of courage and resilience. And I believe that we need to be more authentic. And when we do that and when we share these stories, we change our lives and we change the witness, and it could be through the written word, it could be through the visual word, it could be a piece of music, dance, it doesn't matter. And that's one of the messages I think of the creative activist, because I've interviewed so many incredible people who are sharing their story in another format besides the written word, and the impact is like, oh my, and it opened somebody else when they watched it to start thinking about it in a different way. And that's part of the reason I wanted to have a summit that traversed, the gamut. I have people who are theater, I have people who are filmmakers, I have dancers, I have musicians, authors, so that there were so many ways to tell a story.
Yeah.
And I think even your video that you did for your, tells a different story. So can you talk about
video?
The process?
What video?
That was the one that you showed at Mary Morrissey's about Africa and the village that you were working on. I can't remember the name of it. It was a year ago. So, but I thought it was really powerful. And it just connected people in a different way to the opportunity to actually see what you were doing, because, Africa's far away. It's not in our backyard. We can't picture what their lives are. You can't picture somebody walking with the water on their head, that kind of thing. So I think that's really important.
Well, I think, learning to tell a story, a compelling story, is really important, and video is a great way to do it, and it's a process. I mean, we've made many, many videos, and it's interesting, like, what is it that really will connect to people? So I think learning, we're getting better, we're learning more about how do you tell a story that people can connect with in their hearts.
Right.
And you're right. That is because you can't always go over and see something, or maybe even to be able to portray your own personal story, video, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. So what we've done is we work with people. So I think if we're trying to give people some insight, one of the things that I did when I wrote my first book, and I still do that, is I'm always looking for who is doing something that I think is done really well. So if you're looking to tell your story, you don't have to be a master at doing a video, but find somebody who you think's really good and who tells a story that touches your heart, and learn from them, or maybe get them to enroll them in your project as well.
Right, right. And let's talk about the power of collaboration, if you would, for a minute, because we are starting to draw to an end, and that I'd love people to know about, collaboration and how you share your vision with people in a way that,
So I'll kind of explain it through a story. So basically, in 2006, I was invited to a rural African women conference. And I get this invitation out of the blue, and the only thing that I knew, about this conference is that women were coming together to share their stories. And I felt inspired to go, so I rearranged my schedule, and flew, halfway around the world to Kenya, and for 5 days heard the heartbreaking stories of women that were there looking for solutions for their families. Like, how do we get access to clean water? They're spending half of their day, fetching water. How can you live a productive life when half of your time is involved in retrieving and then, bringing it back to your family every single day? So I made a commitment to those women that I would do something. And I had a birthday, a 50th birthday. I turned 58 years ago, and I decided to turn my birthday into a fundraiser. So this is like, this is a partnership as well, right? Enrolling other people in my vision. And basically, we had 100 people that came. I raised $80,000 that night, and it helped fund 2 schools in Uganda. And that's when the light went on with me. It's like, oh my goodness, if I could do this in one night, what could I do if I actually put my heart and my soul into this? And so I started to do some research because, looking at what is the solution, right? The women have issues like, how do we get clean water? How do we treat our children who get illnesses? How do we make money? Like, they had all of these problems. And I started really doing some research and found out something that shocked me, that in developing countries, there are lots of great organizations that build schools, and in 3 to 5 years later, they're empty. And I looked into, why are they empty? And it all goes back to, you can build a school, but if you don't provide access to clean water and sanitation, girls aren't in school. They're out fetching water, and kids are getting sick from the contaminated water. You can build a school, but if you don't provide access to health care, again, children are sick. They're not going to be sitting in a classroom. If you don't provide a healthy meal and access to nutritious food, again, children are going to be hungry. They can't focus. And then the biggest thing is, if you don't provide a way for parents to generate an income, the project cannot sustain itself. So I started looking for who implements these 5 pillars, essentially. Who implements what is necessary to help that community not only educate their children, but lift themselves out of poverty. And I found an organization, Free the Children, who implements this 5-pillar model. And so we have joined a partnership. We've been working with them since really 2009. And it is so critical because, so many people think, I just talked to somebody yesterday, so many people, want to do things in the world, but you can only do so much by yourself. My vision is that every child gets access to an education. How much can I move the needle on that if I'm doing it by myself? So by partnering with somebody on the ground who has the relationship with the communities, who manages the volunteers and the people who are implementing these services, we're already reaching over 50,000 men, women, and children every single day with these services, and have over 10,000 children every day in school. And now those the children have graduated from primary school. We helped fund 2 secondary schools, and now they're graduating, and we're now funding a program called Unstoppable Scholars, where our partners are building a college, a technical college, and we're funding the scholarships, and we're also implementing a leadership and empowerment curriculum for every single student. So they've got this inner skills and the outer skills.
I love it. I love this model because this could be done in this country. It doesn't have to be done somewhere else either. We have so many crumbling schools. We have kids who are not getting educated. We have violence in the community. I believe that this is a model that we could use around everywhere.
There's no doubt, absolutely. I think partnerships is the key, and it's interesting that you say that because people will say to me, well, why Africa? There's so many issues here. And the only distinction, and the reason I do want to address this, is you're absolutely right. There are so many opportunities for people in need, even in the United States. The distinction is that in the world, 57 million children aren't in even primary school, and almost half of them are in Africa, in the sub-Sahara Africa. When you don't have access to an education, to clean water, I mean, these families have no access to health care, zero. And when there's drought, their children are dying. And so basically it's kind of like triage, where, you're looking at who has the greatest need, and if they don't receive assistance immediately, they could die.
I love that.
That is really the distinction. So it's not one is better than another. It's more like, why have we chosen this path? And I think we all have to go with where we're inspired. So everybody's not inspired internationally, and everybody's not inspired domestically. The key thing is to go where you're inspired, but that's why we chose Africa, because it really is a matter of life and death. And when we go in, what we do is we sponsor an entire village of people, and people, Mary Morrissey, there's so many people who are supporting the Unstoppable Foundation, but essentially for $25,000, you're able to help bring that education through a new classroom, through supplies, through teaching of the teachers, ongoing training, and then the money goes towards those 5 pillars for an entire year until it's ultimately implemented throughout that entire community. So it's kind of a cool model. We consider a village approximately 70 children and their families, so about 350 men, women, and children are impacted through that Sponsor a Village model.
Right, and I love that, in Mary's program, there is that component. She's giving everybody an opportunity to be a philanthropist. And I think it's that is something that there's so many of us who have said, well, I'm not a philanthropist. Even if you gave $5 that day, you are, because there's a global community then. I think we raised enough for at least 3 villages that day, so.
Oh, gosh, absolutely, yes. And how did it impact the event?
I think we forget that we all have that capability. I tell this story, and there are a lot of homeless men in my community, but there's one, and I gave him a jewel card, and I ran into him in the library, and he said, I hope you're not mad at me. And I said, why? He said, well, I used part of that money to buy a box of dog biscuits to give to the dogs in the park. Now, this is a man who is homeless, who has nothing. So we can all give something. I truly believe that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because you realize, oh my gosh, even if you don't have a lot, if you give, you're contributing, you're making a difference. So, and this is an important thing, Ray, because, when I started, I didn't have the money, right? I had never done a project like that. All I had was a purpose that was bigger than my pain. Right. And when I look at my life over now almost 18 years of doing this, it was literally, I had the courage to say yes. I had the courage then to grow my self-esteem enough that I could even invite people to contribute, right? Because that requires, you've got to continue to grow your own self-image. and then to find the partnerships that could implement, who had the integrity and the accountability that makes it work for everyone. So if I can do it, everybody can do it. And like you said, it doesn't need to be building homes in Nepal, but I don't want you to diminish your dream either, because I think it's quite extraordinary what people can do when they actually put their mind to it. We had a group of primary school kids who, in a disadvantaged area in Los Angeles, it's a charter school system, who literally, they raised $30,000 in bake sales and car washes. And these are children whose parents didn't have money, and they were able to raise $30,000 that went towards sponsoring a village in Kenya with us. And you can imagine what that did to their lives and their self-esteem.
Right, their self-esteem. It's the idea then that they are something bigger than, part of something bigger than themselves. They are a team. They, that they have a purpose, and it can start very young. And I think that's part of the mission of all of us, and we can all do that, is share that idea. And so we're building a society that talks about giving is good for the soul. And I think that's a wonderful gift we can all give. I want to ask.
Absolutely.
I wish we could talk for hours, but how can people find you, get a hold of you?
Okay, well, our site is unstoppablefoundation.org. So that is, you can go to the site, you could say contact us, we have all sorts of programs, whether you want to sponsor a village as a family or as an organization, or if you have events. We have really easy tools. You can even use your birthday to raise money to bring education to children. We have all of these turnkey platforms that make it easy for busy people who want to know where their money's going, who want to see a real impact, and feel inspired to be a part of what we're doing. So I invite you listening to go to unstoppablefoundation.org, and if you want to learn more, there's a Contact Us button, and we will reach out to you and see how we could potentially partner together.
Oh, that's fabulous. And again, thank you, Cynthia, for being part of this. And to all the listeners, I hope you're taking notes. This interview was so rich, and so there was so much material and you can listen to it over and over. And I know that you're going to find a way for yourself, that you're going to touch your own life and your family and your community, and it's going to grow. You're going to create a ripple effect, because one person does make a difference. And so thank you for listening. And this is Ray Luskin, the Creative Activist. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Ray.